In 3, 2, 1.
On the road and across the country, it's been another non-stop, action-packed journey for our crew here at Michelle Malkin Investigates.
Pause. Look at that.
In Season 2, we reported on stories that matter and Americans who are making a difference. We set sail from fishing communities in the Northeast.
7. That not enough?
You're higher.
Yeah. Took to the air across the border of Arizona and Mexico.
Our challenges are huge here.
And headed to the West Coast, where we continue pushing for the truth and digging into the DNA science in the case of Daniel Holtzclaw, the former Oklahoma City cop behind bars for alleged sex crimes.
There were problems with the testimony and with the testing, and a new trial should be issued.
A half-dozen experts worldwide are dissecting the DNA flaws and investigative bias.
The report's not just about DNA. Police officers combing through the records to find victims, calling them up, telling them that they have a person who's been accused of multiple crimes. That is perhaps one of the most biased ways of approaching criminal investigation that I've ever seen.
Now, after our breakthrough series, the facts about the Holtzclaw case are catching fire, spreading to law enforcement officers in his home state of Oklahoma.
I'm a police officer. I saw Michelle Malkin Investigates video, Daniel in the Den. After watching that video, I believe he's innocent.
Daniel is an innocent man. I will fight for Daniel. He's now my brother.
A new brotherhood bonded in a fight for truth.
There's more than just me and Ray and others, and Daniel, who have been wrongfully convicted. There's others out there.
On this episode, you'll hear much more from this growing team of advocates and independents as we continue our groundbreaking coverage of what could be Oklahoma's most high-profile wrongful conviction. We'll also update you on the case of the cross-country jihadist, a story we brought you in Season 1. A viewer who knew him personally speaks to us for the first time. All this and more in this special edition of Michelle Malkin Investigates.
Michelle Malkin Investigates. Now, here's Michelle Malkin.
The tide has turned. And that's what the mission of our investigative journalism for CRTV is all about. Since the launch of MMI in December 2016, with our signature series, Daniel in the Den, forensic experts and criminal justice heavyweights have stepped forward to expose just how badly they think the system railroaded Daniel Holtzclaw. You'll hear from two of those leading voices in a moment. But first, let's hear from Daniel. He called in to our railroaded screening in his hometown of Enid, Oklahoma, to thank supporters, especially fellow cops and exonerees Ray Spencer and Brian Franklin.
A lot of people will never understand what it's like to be falsely accused, falsely convicted, and have everything taken from you. I ask all of you to please shake their hands or give them a big hug for me.
Daniel also addressed the local media in attendance, including 2 Oklahoma City TV stations and several Enid outlets.
I thank you guys so much for coming out and taking your time to, report this. But what I encourage you guys to do, please, is to please investigate.
That's exactly what we've been doing. And you won't believe what happened with the secret hearings and evidence we told you about earlier this season. Remember, the Oklahoma Attorney General filed a sealed motion with hidden information that the Court of Criminal Appeals sent back to the trial judge in Daniel's case. Here's surveillance video outside the courtroom of this closed hearing, because we weren't allowed inside. 2 days of secret hearings were held in June 2017 with Judge Timothy Henderson, a court reporter, and representatives from the Oklahoma County DA's office, police department, and city attorney's office. Also in attendance, Campbell Ruddick, OCPD's crime lab supervisor, and the boss of Elaine Taylor, whose scientific misstatements and failures we've been reporting to you since our Daniel in the Den series debuted. But what about Daniel? He is the defendant, after all.
Me, myself, I couldn't even be there, nor my lawyer could be present. How fair is that? How fair is that as far as the judicial process? How fair is that as far as justice?
Through a series of public records requests filed by me and a few other journalists, we learned that crime lab analyst Taylor's personnel records and forensic work were the focus of those secret hearings. We also discovered that the police department had deleted Taylor's account shortly after she retired in February 2017. Poof, all gone. Like Saturday Night Live's church lady used to say, how convenient. The city says it's standard practice, but this is no standard case. Daniel's high-profile criminal appeal is ongoing, and there are nearly a dozen high-dollar civil lawsuits against both Daniel and the city in play. Thanks to mounting pressure in the courts of law and public opinion, the city was forced to magically recover thousands of pages of Elaine Taylor's emails. Though thousands more remain shielded and unknown others may be permanently deleted and unrecoverable. It wouldn't be the first time the OCPD crime lab found itself in the middle of an evidence destruction controversy. During the infamous scandal involving forensic chemist Joyce Gilchrist, crucial trial evidence routinely disappeared. Elaine Taylor worked under Gilchrist. The bombshell news is that all these shenanigans caught the attention of high-profile attorney Kathleen Zellner of Chicago. She represented exoneree Ray Spencer, whom we featured earlier this season in his $9 million civil suit. She's also one of the most successful exoneration lawyers in the country. Zellner freed Ryan Ferguson, wrongfully convicted of murdering a sports editor in Missouri, and also represents Stephen Avery of Netflix's Making a Murderer fame in his post-conviction efforts. In early fall 2017, Zellner fired off a series of public tweets roasting the Oklahoma City Police Department over its bizarre handling of DNA-related emails in Daniel's case. Zellner signaled her intent to get involved in the case, and in late September added Daniel to her Twitter biography's roster of clients. Also speaking out, 6 forensic scientists who analyzed the DNA flaws and failings in the Holtzclaw case. When their motion to file a brief with the Court of Criminal Appeals was rejected, they released their full report publicly. These renowned experts include Peter Gill of Oslo, Jane Goodman-Delahunty in Australia, Moses Shanfield, a former New York lab director, now at George Washington University, George Shiro, a Mississippi-based lab director, Brent Turvey of the Alaska-based Forensic Criminology Institute, and Suzanna Ryan, a California-based DNA scientist. At the heart of the report is the prosecution's so-called smoking gun, DNA on the fly of Daniel's uniform pants that matched the DNA profile of a 17-year-old accuser. Daniel stopped her on June 17, 2014. That DNA was just one contributor to the minuscule mixtures of DNA from at least 3 different contributors, including at least one unknown male. That's important because when Daniel pat-searched the 17-year-old female, he also pat-searched another male and female who were with her. Early the next day, he also pulled over linchpin accuser Janie Liggins during an end-of-shift traffic stop. Liggins was the first to accuse Daniel, in her case, oral sodomy. She went public and the case snowballed. But Liggins' rape kit exam was negative, and the crime lab failed to perform basic serology tests to gather evidence. Like, did any of the DNA on Daniel's pants derive from saliva that you might expect after an oral assault? We traveled to Southern California to get answers. There we met with Holtzclaw Forensic Report co-author Suzanna Ryan, who broke it all down for us. She showed us step by step some of the crucial errors she believes that OCPD crime lab analyst Elaine Taylor made based on testimony and lab reports.
One of the things that you honed in on was the way that the crime lab analyst tested the pants. So we have a pair of pants here, and we wanted to have you explain what she did right and what she did wrong.
So this is a pair of pants that would be similar to the ones that Daniel was wearing. They were described as navy blue uniform pants. She looked at the pants visually. She used a light, kind of a bright light like this. She did mention that she used a magnifying glass. And what she was doing at that time was looking for any stains, visual stains. This is known saliva on here. That wouldn't always show up. On these pants, it is showing up. But if you don't see any staining, then the next thing that you're going to want to do is look with an alternate light source. So when you put on the orange glasses and you have this alternate light source, what happens is after you shut out the lights, you're actually seeing fluorescence from certain body fluids. Okay? So when the lights go out and you have an alternate light source, certain body fluids will fluoresce. In this case, there's a little bit of fluorescence, a little discoloration here in this area. You would also want to check the inner fly area. So there are additional stains that you're not seeing with the naked eye. In this case, the allegations were oral assault, and so saliva is one of those body fluids that does fluoresce. So in my opinion, that is one of the things that should have been done in this case, a simple alternate light source examination, which would help you visualize not just saliva stains, which she was aware there was an allegation of that, but vaginal fluid also fluoresces.
Why wouldn't she use an alternate light source?
I don't know. Again, it's very common practice. There are some tests that are not as common. A test for vaginal fluid is not as common, but a saliva test is common.
So if the crime lab analyst had used an alternate light source and it had lit up to show saliva, what would the next step be?
Many different fluids will fluoresce. So now you want to try to narrow that field. What is the fluid? In this case, again, the initial allegations were oral intercourse. So a logical step would be a saliva test. What it does is it actually gives you a blue coloration if saliva is present. So this is a neat saliva stain. It's very dark blue. On the other hand, if you had a negative, and holding it up here, you've got the blue in the bottom, but it hasn't reacted with anything, so that's why it's clear.
Gotcha.
However, this test also is pretty sensitive. This is a 1 to 100 saliva stain, and you can still see that kind of faint blue coloration. It's a quick test that can be done. It doesn't waste any sample because the cells are actually retained here in this. There's also other tests that could be done. Later, there were allegations of vaginal intercourse. There are not many labs that do presumptive testing for vaginal cells, but it is possible. And actually, one of the ways we can look at the cells is with a microscope. It does give you an indication or an idea of whether vaginal epithelial cells are present.
And this is important because Galen Giger, the assistant district attorney, in his closing statement, asserted flat out that the DNA found on Daniel's saliva's pants came from the vaginal walls of the 17-year-old accuser, and that it came unequivocally from quote-unquote vaginal fluid. But what did the crime lab analyst do to confirm that?
Nothing. There was no serology testing. There was no testing for saliva. There was no testing for vaginal fluid. So that's scientifically incorrect. It's unsound. You can't make a statement that you have identified a fluid if you have not done any testing for that particular fluid.
So what would you have done?
In my laboratory, I do perform testing for vaginal fluid or vaginal epithelial cells. It's not a confirmatory test, but what you can see on the screen actually is one of the stains that I use called Dane stain. You're seeing where there's kind of an orangish color, that's the vaginal cells, whereas buccal cells, cells from your mouth, would be kind of more of a bluish color. So they are not going to look the same on the screen. Now, another test that I do that's a little bit more common is something called the Lugol's test. It's an iodine test where on this particular sample, we can add just a couple of drops, so it's a very quick test. And the vaginal cells, if present, will stain kind of a chocolate brown color, whereas buccal cells will not have that same coloration. So it actually starts reacting right away. So this is my vaginal cells and the buccal cells. So when I look at that under the microscope, what I'm seeing on the screen is a chocolate brown coloration. And so that color is an indication that you're actually dealing probably most likely with vaginal epithelial cells.
It's very distinctive looking.
Right, and the buccal cells, on the other hand, are just sort of a yellowish color. They don't have that same dark coloration. And so it's, again, not a confirmation, but it does give you an idea. And the same way, a lack of those vaginal epithelial cells would give you an indication that it doesn't appear to be vaginal fluid on the sample. This is a way to help distinguish between cells from the mouth and cells from the vagina.
They are very different. They're very distinct.
Right, visually very distinct. So again, not many labs have this type of testing, but it can be done. It can give you an indication then of what sort of body fluid you're looking at.
It's just another useful data point.
It helps to confirm or negate an accuser's story. If they're saying, listen, I was orally assaulted, here's the pair of pants, he didn't pull his pants down, there is an expectation there's probably going to be some saliva transfer.
Yeah.
So let's do the testing and determine, is saliva present? Not just whose DNA. Because you can always look and see, okay, whose DNA it is, but the testing today is so sensitive that you can pick up just skin cells. and you can get DNA from touch and not just from a body fluid.
And that was such an important point of the report that you and your other co-authors made.
Right.
Because it wasn't accurately or scientifically portrayed by either the crime lab analyst or the prosecutor.
Right. Another issue that I had with the analysis was it was stated that Daniel Holtzclaw was not present in the mixtures, and in fact the report stated something different. It said it was inconclusive. We don't know who all's DNA is present, and that's the accurate statement.
I can't understand why these basic things weren't done in this case. What was the conclusion of the report?
Looking at everything, we did conclude that we didn't feel that he had gotten a fair trial, and it's our opinion that there were problems with the testimony and with the testing, and a new trial should be issued.
That wasn't just Suzanna Ryan's finding. 5 other experts did their own independent research and agreed. Let me read you the last line of their report. We believe that Mr. Holtzclaw's conviction should be overturned and he should be given a new trial. Police interviewed Daniel Holtzclaw in person the same day a middle-aged woman accused him of sexual assault. It was during that single 2-hour interview that the detectives diagnosed Daniel as a monster. The words they used to describe him to me were narcissist, psychopath, and evil. But a lot more happened. Let's start by watching a crucial section of the initial interrogation video where the detectives don't take Daniel's underwear. Strange considering he's accused of a sex crime. But they do take his pants and belt. Together, mind you, not separate. That's the first problem. Now, let's back up a little to see what the detective does. Wait, pause it right there. Look at that. See anything wrong? Well, yeah, it doesn't take a trained eye to see a big problem. Detective Rocky Gregory puts his bare hand in the evidence bag. So just how bad of an error is this? Don't take my word for it. We were lucky enough to catch renowned forensic scientist and criminal profiler Dr. Brent Turvey as he was between trials. He took a look at this video and analyzed the problems and showed us what should have happened.
Obviously, the first problem we have is that he's using his naked bare hand. If you're collecting evidence from a suspect or from a witness or from anyone involved in a crime, and you're going to move that evidence directly into an evidence bag, you need to wear latex gloves or mylar gloves to prevent your DNA from transferring onto the object. So what he's done is he's contaminated the inside of the bag with his hand, and he's contaminated the both items of evidence with his DNA, with detective's DNA, before putting them into the bag. That's how touch DNA works. It's very sensitive, and we could pick that up. The second thing is you must have only 1 bag per item of evidence. Now, to properly collect a pair of pants, you do not wad them up and throw them into a bag. That is completely improper, because what you're looking for is stains, other transfers, and patterns. Let's say maybe you're looking for a hair, maybe you're looking for blood, maybe you're looking for semen. We don't know yet because we're right now at the collection phase. So when you collect a pair of evidence like this, what you're supposed to do, wearing proper gloves, is you would lay it down on a piece of paper, a piece of white butcher paper, and you would roll the pair of pants up inside that paper like so. The paper would be creating a layer at each roll. So what you'd have is an item of clothing wrapped up inside what looks like a white roll. And then you would take that item, fold it, and put it into the bag. And then immediately you would have evidence tape, and you would fold the bag down like this. You would seal it with evidence tape, sign your name and assign an evidence item number right across it, put the date, the location where it was collected, all that information to keep and maintain a chain of custody. Because now you've secured it in such a fashion that you can test it at a later date and presume that you've not contaminated it. And not only have you prevented immediate contamination, you prevented future contamination from the object, things shaking off of it, patterns transferring around, hairs transferring around. Because when you open this bag at a later date, you're going to not only take out what's in the bag, you're going to look inside the bag and see if anything fell off during transfer. And here's the most important thing. If you're doing a real investigation, you don't know what's important until later on. So you want to make sure to protect the integrity of every piece of evidence you collect.
So all of these errors compounded by having multiple items in the bag as well creates more routes for possible contamination?
It shows an overall attitude of total disregard for the physical evidence. This guy doesn't care about the DNA. He doesn't care about the physical evidence. He's just doing what he thinks he has to do. He's doing this almost theatrical, like he's trying to use this as a mechanism by which he's going to get an inculpatory statement for Daniel to say, yeah, I'm going to take this, I'm going to send it to the lab. No, in reality, if you're really doing it properly, you go through a whole procedure and you have somebody do it who knows what they're doing. This shows somebody who doesn't understand physical evidence, doesn't care about the physical evidence.
Wow, a total and reckless disregard for the evidence. Such a simple thing that could have such a profound effect on the investigation. While DNA was a key issue, there were many other problems. Retired NYPD detective and founder of Forensics for Real Inc., John Paolucci, attended our screening of the Railroaded episode and had this to say about the interrogation video as a whole.
When I watched that interview of Daniel, how many people have watched that? Is that a piece of work or what? Work is the four-letter word choice right now.
Because Dr. Turvey is also a criminal profiler, we wanted to ask him about the key players in the investigation, the detectives, attorneys, and accusers. We started by showing him a clip of our interview with the lead detectives on the case. I wanted you to take a look at the answers that Detective Kim Davis and Rocky Gregory, the sex crime detectives who led this, and given that it was Daniel Holtzclaw who was calling in through his CIU unit with the Vruna records and never denied that he had come into contact with any of these women, what they did was take all that information and then reverse engineer by, as you say, going out and seeking out all of these women except for the very first accuser. So this is an exchange that I had with them about the lack of physical evidence at that first stop. What were the results of the SANE test with regard to Jamie Liggins?
There was no DNA in her mouth.
She also said that at one point his hands were on top of the car, and at one point her hands were on the hood?
On the hood, yes.
And what were the results of the DNA tests on those?
They didn't DNA test those, they fingerprinted. You can't do both.
Okay, and what were the results of that?
They didn't get fingerprints.
Why do you think that is?
Because hundreds of people touched the cars, the weather, you gotta keep in mind, Holtzclaw's car was a pigsty. It was absolutely nasty. And a lot of times, like when we go into a house for a burglary, and it's just nasty, you never get results from that, just from the filth.
Wow.
And his car was pretty filthy.
So the fingerprint tests came back negative on the car, and the SANE test came back negative for DNA in her mouth.
Correct.
You still believed her story at that point?
I did.
Detective Gregory, same?
Yes, after Kim kind of relayed everything, because Kim's done hundreds and hundreds of investigations, and she's got a good grasp on whether a victim's telling the truth or not, and just kind of the storyline that she told me.
Okay. Okay.
I know.
There's layers of problems here.
Yeah, tell us.
Let's start with the first premise. They know the truth, and the truth is that when the victim makes a statement, you must bother to test their statements against the physical evidence record. And if their statements do not lead to physical evidence, that's a problem. What they're doing is explaining it away while still clinging to their original assumption, which is that Holtzclaw must be guilty of these crimes. So first of all, let's talk about the physical evidence transfer. The hood of a car is very good for both identifying visual prints, but also for identifying latent prints and for pulling them. The next statement was to explain that was his car was filthy. In fact, they went on, she used the word nasty.
It was absolutely nasty.
She immediately, her emotional response goes way up. She knows that she's got a problem because there should have been fingerprints. And two, instead of dealing with that, she starts characterizing the defendant in a very negative way.
Pigsty.
It was so inappropriate. And I can't even begin to tell you the problem that I have with that, because it gives us a real quick peek inside of her mind. She's not talking about the car, she's talking about Daniel.
Yeah.
She's trying to vouch for her lack of evidence by talking about his character. And that is, emotionally, That works so well with people. That's what we've been trained to think that way. Oh, his car's nasty, he's guilty. An investigator who thinks that way has a threshold problem with objectivity and really needs to find a new profession. What's really interesting to me is him, the detective. He immediately is not willing to take any responsibility for anything that's happened. He's like, she said it was, and she's smarter than me, and she's been doing this longer.
Yeah.
Her whole thing is, well, I've worked hundreds of cases. Experience is not a shield to scientific scrutiny. Experience is something you demonstrate by doing your due diligence and following your protocols. So when someone uses their experience to explain why they didn't do their job, that to me is an oxymoron. I would want to go and look at every single case she's worked at to see whether or not she did this based on a feeling.
She's acting as an advocate?
She's acting as an advocate for the victim instead of an advocate for the truth, to find the truth. That's the job, to uphold the Constitution, which applies to everybody in a case, not just one person that she likes or dislikes or finds nasty. That's not what you do. The science has proven over and over again that detectives cannot tell. It's no better than a coin toss, whether you can tell where someone's lying to me. That's why we bother to employ people at a crime lab. That's why we bother to test evidence, because people do lie and they get ground balls by you all the time because you're not paying attention, because you think you're a super cop. You think you're a super lie detector.
Yeah.
You're not. It's not how it works.
This was an interesting phenomenon because you had the procurement of the 13 accusers and
It's a great word for it.
There were 8 out of the 13 on whose charges Daniel was found guilty, and it was a mishmash of almost random or splitting the baby is how both the detectives and government officials have put their description of the verdict.
They split the baby on him.
They split the baby. Is that justice?
Well, that's how they perceived it.
That's
You
how it
had
works.
5 of the accusers on whose charges Daniel was completely cleared of. There just seemed to be a randomness about it. There was one, Shardarian Hill, who was caught at the end of her interview with Rocky Gregory saying, is this good evidence? She sort of stretched her arms out as if it was all in a day's work and said, the phrase was, quote,
even if he didn't even rape nobody or nothing, he's been in contact with people that he arrested.
Because he had contacted these women, somehow he deserved to face some sort of legal consequences for that.
And that's advocacy one way or the other. You essentially assume the premise in order to prove the argument. And that's, again, a logical flaw. It's what happens when you have detectives who are not properly educated. You have people who are functionally, logically illiterate, who are advocates running cases instead of people who have proper education and proper scientific and investigative protocol.
As the case attracted national media attention, there were many opportunists who came forward, and
We call them false reporters, but yes.
false reporters that,
Right.
that piled on. So I wanted to ask you about Shanice Barksdale. This is a picture of her. She is one of the many women, and one man, by the way, who came forward in the course of all of the media frenzy to claim that they had also been sexually molested or assaulted by Daniel Holtzclaw. And I want you to take a look at some of the video of her interview.
We don't want this guy out here hurting our own citizens. There's others out there that's real. If I didn't have to work on this case, okay, and try to track down real victims, because I've had to go to a lot of women this stuff happened with, okay? They didn't come forward. I've had to go find them, okay? If I didn't have that real thing to do right now, I probably would arrest you.
I am astonished, not only that she was not arrested on the site, but that he acknowledges that he should have arrested her and didn't. When you have somebody who's a false reporter and they're willing to do this, very often false reporting is associated with other incidents. They're not just doing it one time. So if you arrest one time, you're preventing not one false reporter, you're preventing the 20 more that are going to come later on in their life. Because they're going to realize, once they realize it works and there's no consequences, they're going to keep doing it. She should have been arrested. And he acknowledges that in the interview. And that fact is, what it tells you is how fast and loose they're playing with the law. But more importantly, it gave you an insight into his thinking. If I just had good evidence, some people making a good statements, I could arrest this guy. He's looking for that golden ticket and he couldn't find it.
And the only difference between women that they determined were lying and women who they determined were telling the truth was it needed to match up with the GPS and AVL information. So the same way that they applied that to the presence of DNA, they applied it to, well, if the GPS showed that Daniel was in a certain place, ergo, a sexual assault must have occurred.
It's completely improper, but it goes right back to basic interview interrogation techniques. He's not thinking like a detective, he's not thinking like a truth seeker, he's not thinking like he cares about what actually happened. And they're using GPS data in that same fashion. With this, therefore, because of this. That's not how it works, and that does not create good truth seeking.
It's terrifying.
No, but it's common. It's the way that law enforcement investigates cases. They trace statements instead of evidence. They don't follow the evidence. They don't let the evidence tell them what happened. They decide what happened, and then they try to cherry pick the evidence to fit their narrative.
7 months after Shanice Barksdale admitted lying to police about Daniel to help the case, she was finally charged with felony false reporting of a crime. But it was dropped to a misdemeanor. In May 2016, she pleaded guilty and got off with a short probation and a tiny fine. She wasn't the only known liar. From what I understand, there were an additional 7 whose allegations didn't hold any water with you all.
Some people thought of money or just wanted attention or however. I interviewed one male.
One male who said that Daniel Holtzclaw. And what was the outcome of that?
He admitted he lied.
Yeah. So there are plenty of reasons to lie, including
get out of trouble.
Yes. And money, as you said, was a big factor for people. They wanted to cash in.
After they saw it on the TV, they were like, ooh, I can get in on this.
And this kind of case and these kind of allegations are sort of a magnet for people who are looking to cash in.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. Despite acknowledging that at least 7 people, including one male, had lied in order to join the Holtzclaw publicity bandwagon and high-dollar civil lawsuits, police and prosecutors failed to charge anyone else but Barksdale with making false allegations. That's alarming. False narratives aren't harmless fibs. They can cost innocent people their freedom, even their lives. This is a copy of Dr. Brent Turvey's newest textbook, False Allegations, Investigative and Forensic Issues in Fraudulent Reports of Crime. As Dr. Turvey teaches students and true law enforcement professionals, it is a fact of life and the criminal justice system that people lie. Moreover, quote, too many investigators succumb to personal and institutional bias, and they perpetuate deceit. Lying about crimes is a crime, and enabling lies is as wrong as telling them, especially when those lies are told under oath and in front of a jury. In Daniel's case, the lead prosecutor got away with apparently telling falsehoods about the DNA evidence. The crime lab analyst got away with failures to do basic serology tests and to disclose vital information about the DNA mixtures. These forensic falsehoods drove a biased investigation by detectives who manufactured a profile of Daniel's victims based on personal beliefs and gut instincts. They concluded Daniel was guilty before they had gathered all the facts. They sought out accusers, casting a wide dragnet involving more than 40 women, proactively informed many that they were seeking out sexual assault victims to get a bad guy off the streets. They dismissed basic factual discrepancies, illogical claims, repeated denials, and pleas by at least one woman to be left alone.
No, I don't want to, please. I just want to leave it alone.
They acted as advocates instead of investigators, routinely excusing accusers' lapses of memory, explaining away repeated failures to find corroborating forensic evidence, and downplaying their troubled histories, including crimes of deceit. With the exception of Janie Liggins, publicity hound and lead civil rights lawsuit plaintiff, it was Daniel who placed himself at the scene by calling in and running the accuser's data through his patrol work. He readily acknowledged that every encounter with the accusers occurred, not the work of a serial predator trying to hide his actions. Sexual allegation falsehoods were inserted into a true framework. Misleading police reports omitted exculpatory information that didn't fit the detective's predetermined outcome. Prosecutors depended on those incomplete and biased reports to shape their narratives. These non-credible stories were then all chained together and bolstered by falsely portrayed DNA evidence that greatly swayed the jury. Scientist Erica Fuchs explains the damage wrought by these misleading statements.
The government should not be allowed to convict people by stating lies, and that's happened in Daniel's case. It's not a bad thing to be wrong, but what is bad is when you cover it up and you don't acknowledge it.
Daniel's growing team of supporters is ensuring that the cover-up fails and sunlight prevails. More independent observers and experts are asking, as we first did on this billboard that sparked so much controversy, what if he didn't do it? And defense attorney Kathleen Zellner is determined to rewrite the ending for innocent defendants, and that list now includes Daniel. Another expert now speaking publicly is Ken Tisdel, a former law enforcement officer whose company LCG handles high-tech and complex investigative matters. He is one of many donating valuable time to clear Daniel's name. He had strong words for those involved in what he believes to be a botched, biased investigation.
We're coming after Oklahoma City, and we're coming after Kim Davis and Rocky Gregory. The work that they did was horrible at best. We will continue to go after you, and it will be very embarrassing for Oklahoma City and all these other parties for the travesty that they've inflicted upon Daniel and his family.
We'll continue to uncover the buried facts and truths as Daniel's defenders inside and outside the courtroom fight for his freedom.